Running over to the dining room window, I called back over my shoulder. "What is it, Dad?" My father dropped the fork he was holding, spilling a glass of red wine onto his newest work shirt. He didn't even notice. "Jesus Christ," he said, losing his cool for a brief moment. "I don't know." He stood next to me as we watched the yellowish blur rapidly change directions above our town. It looked like some type of ship. "Where'd it go?" my dad whispered. "There!" I yelled. Our town was located along a 6-mile-long lake, and we watched in awe as the bright object zigzagged rapidly from one corner to the other at speeds that even a child could tell were impossible. My father took out his cell phone, more in the state of shock than calmness, and dialed. Having been a deputy up until last year, he had the number memorized. "Sheriff, this is Doug Turner." My father paused, still watching the light dance around the dark sky above. "Sheriff, look up." There was more silence then, as I assumed the sheriff was as confused and perhaps afraid as we were. My father hung up and looked back over at me. "He's gonna make some calls. Says it's probably just someone testing out a new drone." The ominous yellow light turned dark then, a moment after looking to have landed near William's ranch at the east corner of town. "Come on, you gotta get some rest for school," my father said. I think he tried to hide what he was really feeling. He forced a smile as the phone rang again. "This is Doug." "Yes, sir. Give me about 20 minutes. My father looked over at me, and for a second, I thought I saw the fear on his face. He pushed it aside. "Come on, let's get you to bed." He tucked me in and kissed me on the forehead. Before I could tell him to be careful, he tried his best to ease my worries. "Don't worry, I'm sure it's nothing. Sheriff says he's bringing 3 or 4 others along." He winked. "Whatever it is, I'll be careful." And when he was gone, leaving the light on near my bed and closing the front door with a click, I was home alone, but no one in the town ever worried about such things as burglars, or worse. At least, not yet. I don't know how I fell asleep, but all I can tell you is I woke up the next morning with a terrible headache. My father hadn't come home. Clutching my head tightly, I still managed to run into the kitchen and was surprised to see him waiting for me at the table. "Good morning, son." I looked over at him with confusion as he made no attempt to go over the previous night. "What was it, Dad?" His blank expression held. "What was what, son?" I became more confused. "The yellow light, the thing in the sky that you and Sheriff went to check? I think you must have had a nightmare, son," he replied firmly. And then he stood up from the table and smiled. It didn't ease my fear, only enhancing it, as the smile turned into a grin far wider than I was accustomed to. "Say, you know what? I've been thinking that maybe you can take the day off from school today. Maybe we can go for a little field trip." "Yeah, sure," I replied uneasily. "Do you mind if I rest a little first, though? I've got a really bad headache." His smile deflated a little at that, as he seemed to be thinking it over. A moment later, it came back in full force. "Sure thing. Get some rest and we'll head out around noon. I've got something to show you." He kissed me on the forehead as he had the night before, but this time it was awkward, and it made me feel, well, scared. Going back to my room, I shut the door behind me and pressed my head into the pillow to try and dull the pain. How could he not remember last night? Was it actually possible I had dreamt the whole thing? As I stood and looked out the window, though, thoughts from the previous night rushed back. I remembered details that I had somehow forgotten. I hadn't fallen asleep as my father had gone to check out the strange sighting with the sheriff. I had instead sat by the window and watched. I can't remember everything, but I know I saw something. 20 minutes or so after my father had left to meet the sheriff, there was a blinding flash of light that emanated from where we had last seen the object land. It flickered yellow, then red, then a silverish green that I can't even put into words. After that, the memories stop. I don't recall falling asleep, and I definitely don't remember my father returning that night. I don't know what is going on, but I'm scared as hell as I wonder about his plans for today. Why am I so afraid? I love my father. I trust my father. Yet I can't stop thinking of the unreal colors and amazing flashes of light that I'm somehow certain were from some type of ship. And I've never seen anything move that fast before. My intuition yells out to me that it's not from this world, and that I have every reason to be afraid of what's to come. I don't know what's going to happen later today, but one thought keeps replaying itself over and over in my head. I keep thinking that if my father and I go up to William's ranch, that I might not make it back. My headache grew worse, perhaps due to my anxiety of what the rest of the day might hold. My brain thought of what my father planned to show me, and where we might go. I'm ashamed that one thought was more prevalent than all the others. Is he even still my father? I'm not sure how much time passed before the door creaked open slowly, and I opened my eyes to see him grinning over at me. "It's time," he said quietly. My eyes met his, and before I could tell him how my headache had gotten worse, or think of some other excuse to stay at home, he continued, "Don't worry. Once we get there, you'll feel a lot better, I promise." I nodded. Perhaps a different day, I would have had the willpower to argue, or to think through the events of the previous night with more clarity, but not in my current condition. The pounding in my head felt like a jackhammer hard at work inside my skull, and was so intense now that I could barely open my eyes, let alone argue. He helped me up to his old red pickup truck, gave me a pillow to press my head against, and closed the door behind me. The engine of the old Ford started up easily, and I drifted in and out of sleep as he put the car in drive and made his way down the long road into town. Opening my eyes for a moment, a bright patch of pine trees could be seen out my window. I saw a family of deer as well, their eyes seeming to focus on me as we made our way into town. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, but for a moment I thought I saw sadness in their faces. They almost looked worried, but not for themselves. When we got into town, it was unlike anything I had ever seen. My friends, my family were there, as if they had been waiting for me. Their eyes were so cheerful and joyous that they seemed to almost glow, and as we drove further through the town square, each one of them smiled from ear to ear as we passed by. Every single person in town waved, almost in unison. "They're happy to see you," my father said, chuckling. "Where are we going, Dad?" Before my eyelids fell again from the pain, I saw him look over at me and wink for a second time that day. "We're going to where it all begins." I must have fallen asleep then, because the next thing I knew I was standing in an open field of lavender that must have been William's ranch. The sun wasn't as bright as it had been while we'd driven, and strangely enough my headache was almost completely gone now. "You ready?" my father asked, and I noticed that his eyes weren't the calm brown I had known before, but now some type of silver. "Ready for what?" I asked. "Ready to see it," he said, holding that same grin and stepping aside. On the ground behind him lay a circular silver disc, maybe only a few feet wide. I found it almost unimaginable that such a small object could have been responsible for the blinding display that we had seen the previous night. "That's it?" I asked. My father nodded. "Go closer," he said. I shuddered, the first time since awakening, feeling an urge of fear make its way through my body. "I don't want to get closer," he interrupted. his tone changing only slightly towards anger, and perhaps impatience. I don't know where to, but maybe I would have run then, far away from this place and far away from the dream of it all. Yet, right then, the people around us came into view. Every friend and family member I knew stood in a circle around us. They didn't say a word, but their intentions were clear enough. They were waiting. I understood then that I was the last. "Don't be afraid, son," my father said. "You'll understand in a moment." I knew then that I didn't have much choice in the matter, and though beyond terrified, I began to walk past my father and towards the small silver object ahead of me. The strange thing was, the closer that I got, the less small it seemed. At first, I had noted it to be only just a few feet in diameter. Now, as I approached the object, it seemed to go on for miles. How was that even possible? As it loomed just in front of my gaze, I began to understand my father's words. This object wasn't a craft or alien ship. It was much more. The thing began to show me what it would bring to our world. There would be no more fighting and no more war. There would be no more sickness and no more pain. There would be no more death. Still, there was something frightening, I realized, hidden below its smooth surface. Something dark, and something wrong, and something. "You're the last in our town," my father continued. "Go ahead, son. Reach out." His eyes were darker, than yet they somehow glowed, and it seemed like I was just an observer in some terrible nightmare. I saw my hand reach out, crossing the bridge between worlds, touching the silver object that seemed to go on forever. I suddenly understood everything. In the span of an instant, the 12-year-old boy I had been was dead. And in the same moment, I understood completely why my father and the other townspeople had been smiling. Of course they should be smiling. I began to smile too. No more pain, no more death, no more war. Well, that's not completely true. There would be one more war. In fact, it would be the war to end all wars. I smiled wider as the others had, understanding that now I would be on the winning side.